Okay, now for our panelists with Rick Ainsworth come forward. He is the director for the Center for Excellence in Engineering and Diversity in the College of Engineering at UCLA. It's in the College, right, of Engineering? School of, I'm sorry, at UCLA. And you're serving as the director for diversity and K through 20 outreach in the new Nano ERC at UCLA.
Well, thank you. I think that previous one was rather detailed and interesting comments. Let's hope I can get this right here. Maybe I should go back. One of the things I want to sort of address is aligning ERCs with the minority engineering effort and what the minority engineering effort really is. Now, I think Teresa said there's a sort of a difference between the social justice and the economic reality of what sort of diversity is and how it impacts the nation. But it also had a beginning. And so I opened my mouth and talked about that there's a history of the minority engineering effort, and then somebody stuck me with it. So now I have to sort of come with some background. It wasn't easy to find. Where it really started was in 1961 with President Kennedy's affirmative action tone, where what he tried to do was to desegregate Washington, D.C., both in the U.S. government and in the city, having had President Wilson, who came in and segregated the government and the city. So President Kennedy tried to reverse that action, and people don't know that that's exactly what happened, that D.C. was rather integrated until that point. Now, one of the things that really got sort of affirmative action going was in 1968, after the assassination of Martin Luther King. And I know people don't want to hear all this history, but it's really where it happened. And what happened, that became concrete, because in the next week and a half after the assassination, there was riots across the United States in 120 different cities and communities. And so the whole world watched this and questioned the democracy of the U.S. So it wasn't so much a matter of social justice, or a matter of necessity to resurrect what the vision of America is. And in doing so, it brought the U.S. government, corporations, foundations, and university systems together. It's created sort of that valence of action. And it started, and I'll give you a little quick overview of the early history of the effort, the formation of these things called minority engineering programs, the impact it's made, the challenges, and some current demographic sort of trends, which I'll probably skip over some since it was addressed a little bit earlier. And the ERC roles in diversifying engineering education, what can be done, both in terms of little strategy and also what actually is happening that makes that difference. The corporation, the first group of people was GE, General Electric, who came in, and that senior vice president wrote a white paper and addressed it to an engineering education conference. And he was the first person to come up with actual numbers. And he said, and this is a quote out of this book called The Blueprint for Action, of 43,000 engineers in 71, only 4 in 7 were black, and a handful of others. Nobody even had record of that. His idea was, looking forward, we're facing some changes that we must address. And he looked at what's going to happen to the corporations down the road when this population is not represented. So he was already forecasting, I think, the issue. Right? And then he put the challenge, I think, squarely, saying we have to at least increase these numbers of engineers, minority engineers, graduates, by at least an order of magnitude, at least, if not more. Now, the idea there was to do some solutions which were bold, innovative, sort of all-out action, which is right down the alley of ERCs. That's what you're about. You do bold, innovative, and you take action. But the group that addressed it first and took the challenge was the Sloan Foundation. In 1974, they gathered the NAE, ASEE, and everybody they could to come up with a blueprint for action. Right? And the strategies were 20 of them, but we just extracted, I think, 5. Schools of engineering should double the URE freshman engineering students, double the graduates. There should be one national organization to provide scholarships for everybody, and that organization still exists. It's the National Action Committee for Minorities in Engineering. It still provides scholarships. They do that in the K-12 now as opposed to the undergrad, which I think is a mistake, but there are certain reasons why that's the case. And that they should establish K-12 university programs, meaning summer programs that could bring students in and put them through an engineering education, including math and chemistry and science instruction as well as, and they've sort of presaged this, some research. And then the idea was that Sloan decided to fund 12 pre-college programs across the nation. Those who survived was the MESA program. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the MESA program, but they're all over. They're a multi-state program operating out of the University of California. The SECME group, which is in the Southeastern Consortium of Minorities in Engineering, which is a K-12 program, and a teacher development program, and TAME in Texas, and a couple others in Detroit that are not as large. So the strategies were in place way back. And the other thing was to, schools of engineering should establish MEPs. And that took a little while, but it did happen. Now, the response was 5 engineering schools took that challenge up and started the MEP program. But there were some antecedents. The National Society of Black Engineers was a group of students in Purdue in 1971 who decided to form themselves in an organization. That has grown to be the largest student-run organization in the nation. They're based in D.C. They're all student-run, and they have conferences that bring 10,000 black engineering students together. And it will be happening in February in Indiana, and this week is going to be the SHIP conference, which started in 1974, and then the ACES was started in the 80s, which is the American Indian Society of Engineering and Scientists. A model was developed at Cal State Northridge, which is now part of the ERC at UCLA. And that model prevailed of exactly what an MEP was. And it started with the one key thing, is that you must build a community. If you don't do that, much as if your Meyerhoff program that you came out of UMBC, those things were critical programs. That's what really got it going. And then here are some of the components. Now, these are took 20, 25 years to develop. Things could happen, you could do to improve both the incoming and the retention and the graduation and the development and the professionalism of minority engineers. Right? And one of the things you should look is they always had a class, a freshman introduction to engineering class that was across all the disciplines, so that this group of students would first understand why they chose engineering, what really, since they didn't have backgrounds or parents in engineers, what in the world would they want to do, right? Now, the expansion of it started in 1979 when a group of directors formed what's called NMEPA. And the first real expansion happened in California, where the state decided to develop 23 MEPs over a 3-year period. So almost every school of engineering in the state of California had one of these programs. The other thing was that the summer programs called MITES were developed in all across the nation. All right? They don't exist anymore. They rarely exist. All right? And of course, we can skip that. But one of the things is they support about 20,000 African American, American Indian, Latino, Hispanic engineering students currently. And that's down from the high. Now, if we look at the impact starting over, let's say, a 30-year period or more, and now they're left, you know, like little guys like me. And legal challenges, as you know, these are plentiful. Admission challenges to admission by race and ethnicity, the rising admission criteria, but mainly by the children of immigrants who come with rather strong education culture. Scholarships, that's being attacked in many places. You can't target anymore. The MITE programs are almost pretty much disappeared, and that's a key strategy to change the input and the preparation for this group. New deans are less supportive. They come from all over the world. They're not sure what this history, what this stuff is all about, why is it necessary. More than that is that the pressure to diversify MEP. So when you try to diversify it, then the students of color kind of drift away, right? The new K-12 engineering programs are not really focused on URMs. That is the Project Lead the Ways, the First Robotics. You just have to see where and who they deal with. You don't see that group in there in any kind of representation that they exist in the communities. I'll skip through this a little bit, except for, because it's been kind of going over, except you can see pretty quickly the Hispanic rise, but that's mainly the force of immigration, not the efficiency of educating them. And the dip in the African American students has been overtaken by foreign student enrollment, foreign nationals. And again, the overall dip in why that's occurred, maybe it's female, we're not sure. I saw the data presented, but there was a dip in the white enrollment. Diversity, and I'll skip over this to the bottom point, is that the national retention graduation rate of underrepresented students in engineering is about 40%. This is the case in 1995. Since 1995, it hasn't changed that much. So there's a retention problem. And there's a retention problem generally, but there's a particularly severe with the underrepresented students. All right? So the ERCs have a role to play in all of these issues. And actually, it could be a powerful change agent in these issues. Now, the input-output problem is something that California personifies. This is the K-12 enrollment in 2008, 2009. 57%, that is about 3-point-something million kids are underrepresented in the School of Engineering, in the state of California K-12 system. I mean, it's half of the students. It's a huge population, the largest in the nation, right? Now, if you see, how does that represent, let's say, in the University of California Schools of Engineering, all 10 of them? If you take a quick look, you'll see how meager those enrollments are. Right? And this is the premier institution in the country, one of them at least. Right? It's pretty dismal. Now, if you look at the output, you can, at the same time in 2008, about 1,200 or 15% or less of all the engineering graduates in the state coming from the UCs, the CSU system, which is the largest system, and then the private schools. So there's very few coming out of that. Right? Commensurate with not commensurate with their population in K-12. All right, so some quick things I'll go through is that ERCs present an opportunity for the PIs to lead. Now, you're asked to lead these amazingly fundamental sort of research enterprises. You're asked to translate that to the market economy, and you're asked to sustain it. And then now you're asked to change the culture in engineering. So you're kind of confused of what to take. We know what you're going to, where you live. You live in that wavelength of being a researcher, and we're trying to stretch you into the band of diversity, translational, and market economy, and hope some of you will become millionaires and take us with you. So I think, actually Teresa mentioned, 1 minute, we'll do it. Teresa mentioned some programs NSF has. And these are, I think, apt opportunities for leadership where you don't have to be everything, but you can really take, I think, ownership of some things that helps MEPs survive or either exist or expand. One, you can serve as PIs and work with these groups to actually create proposals that can support those centers and your enterprise. It's easy to do. This is $500,000 to $2 million to do these things, and it can support the culture, the minority engineering or the diversity programs. The scholarships the same way. These are federal dollars. What does it take for you to sit down with them and create a proposal together? And of course, the math science partnership programs, which are long-term, 5-year or more programs for K-12 reformation, and you can use your research center for that. So there are a lot of things you can do that does not actually take away, but actually helps your center and helps you to be that leader. Again, I think particularly the last thing is trying to get the ERC graduates and knowledge transfer to K-12. Use your graduate students to do that and attend those ACES, NSBE, and SHIP conferences. Buy a booth, do a workshop. I think it'd be really good. Thank you.
some of your comments made me think that perhaps we can think about diversity not as a mutually exclusive activity, but just an integral activity where it's second nature. Okay, so to move things along, Diane, would you just come up? Diane Matt, I've known her for several years, has been executive director of WePan since
2004.
2004, and so it's been a delight knowing her over all these years. I spoke at the WePan annual meeting in June and talked about the impact of ERCs in this area with women in particular, and so I thought it'd be a great idea to have her join us at our meeting.
Thank you, everybody. How is the sound? Yeah? Okay, in the back, it's working. Good. So let me look at this. Got it. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you today, and it's been kind of amazing for me to join you. I arrived yesterday around lunchtime and had a chance to hear Tina Selig's presentation, and that was a real key part of what I want to convey also, so I'll be referring back to her talk some. I really appreciate Rick's comments because I think the contextual backdrop that he gave us gives you a sense of some of the imperatives that go along with diversity in this country, and certainly Brooke and Teresa did a really nice job of speaking to the future. When you start to think about the fact that all over the country right now, 40% of our kindergarten class are children of color. That means in 12 years, those will be our graduating seniors and the pool of students that we draw into engineering in higher education. So right now we do a not really very good job of attracting minority students into engineering or women students in engineering. But we've got 12 years before we have a really big challenge. So there's a little fiscal cliff coming for engineering, and I think the engineering research centers, as you all have been hearing, we think you have a lot of potential to really tackle this in a new way. We know your efforts have been very strong so far, and we also know we have a long way to go. So building on that foundation, I want to talk really about three things today. I want to talk about the roles of various leaders in diversity within your engineering research centers, because all of us are leading in that regard one way or the other. I want to talk some about the intersection of diversity and inclusion and innovation, and Tina set us up, I think, really well to do that. Then I want to share some resources to set the stage for next steps, because I just know you're all going to be dying to take next steps on all of these things. I have put a few handouts on the tables, and I have more of those. Some of them talk about a knowledge center that WePan has formed, as well as some actions that people can take, and my business card. So all of that is a packet of stuff that you have available to you. So let's get going. WePan stands for Women in Engineering Proactive Network, and I want to show our core purpose on this slide, which is to propel higher education to increase the number and advance the prominence of diverse communities of women in engineering. And I think you'll notice in there that there's a nose counting goal of increasing the number, which is very important, but there's also a more cultural goal of advancing the prominence and thinking in terms of diverse communities of women. Our big goal is 50-50 by 2020, and that, as you can see from some of the slides you've seen already, actually is a very big goal. You may be asking at this point, okay, that's a great goal. How the heck are you going to do it? What makes that up? WePan works toward its core purpose in a couple of ways. We collect and describe and organize a gender in STEM knowledge base of more than 1,300 resources that can be easily accessed online by anyone around the world. And it's called the WePan Knowledge Center. And one of my handouts is essentially a business card for the WePan Knowledge Center. Visit early, visit often. I do monthly webinars helping people learn how to use that resource. WePan is really a dissemination and change agent organization. We also offer webinars on key topics related to gender in STEM. All of those webinars right now are free. They're recorded and they're available to look at, at your leisure online and on our website. We also hold an annual conference with papers, panels, keynote addresses. So what we really do is to push this knowledge forward to our members. Many of you may be WePan members. I see some nodding heads out there. And get that knowledge base into lots of people's hands. I think one of the things that I'm observing in the short time I've been at the conference is there's been a steady dialogue about a whole body of knowledge related to diversity and creativity and innovation that maybe isn't on the front burner of your stove, and utilizing organizations like WePan and NAMIPA and SHIP and ACES and the other engineering diversity societies to pull that knowledge into your world is a very good strategy. So now I want to go up the food chain just a little bit and look for a moment at why NSF thinks broadening participation is important. The three little boxes on this slide talk about NSF's strategic plan. And the first one relates to a main goal of preparing and engaging a diverse STEM workforce. The second block talks about near-term actions in the NSF strategic plan related to sharing, learning, and expanding effective practices among NSF programs. And you know what? That's what we're doing right now. We're talking about effective practices that can be incorporated into the work that you do. And all of that really translates into a key aspect of the broader impacts criterion, which I know everybody in this room has had to wrestle with as they've been preparing their proposals, and that is to broaden participation of underrepresented groups. We've had some other input already today about who those underrepresented groups are, so I think you are well aware of that. The bottom line is, my next slide is about a snapshot of where we are with women in engineering. And you can see we start at the top with engineering-ready high schoolers, and those are about 45% girls. So young women are taking advanced math and science classes at about the same rate as young men are, and they're scoring just as well on the standardized tests. And that's a real bright spot, because 30 years ago, you've heard that we've done a lot of things in the last 30 years. 30 years ago, that was definitely not the case. And then we drop, and we get into this range of 18 to 21, 22%. Engineering undergraduate students are women, 20% BS degrees go to women in engineering, 21.8% of the PhDs are awarded to women. So we're sort of stuck in that 1/5 zone. Then we get into faculty positions, and you can see that only 14% of the tenure or tenure track positions in engineering are occupied by women, and only 8.7% of the full professors are women. So this is a picture of attrition as we go along the pathway to full professor in engineering. The important thing I want you to take away at this is, as PIs of engineering research centers and all the rest of you who are represented here, you have opportunities to have impact at every one of these levels. And some of you are already doing that. Some of you may be less clear about how that happens. There actually is a rich body of research about root causes of underrepresentation, as well as related interventions for each of these groups that can be employed in your engineering research centers. And my message about this slide is to be strategic about where you invest your energies and resources for maximum impact. You can see that the biggest zone of probably pain here is really in that full professor area. That's a very low number. The same with tenure and tenure track. There are many things that you can do to support increased diversity in all of those areas. And I'll add a little footnote that many of the strategies that you might choose to use for increasing gender diversity in your centers also will work with some tweaking and modifying for other underrepresented groups. So it can be a pretty holistic approach. So the bottom line is we have made improvements and we're also kind of stuck. Another improvement that may not be apparent right now is that from the 1970s to the 1990s, BS engineering degrees awarded to women increased from 2%, which is like painfully low, to 17%. So that's amazing. On the other hand, right now women comprise 57% of the undergraduate students. So we're not really keeping pace there. At the same time, women are making excellent strides in other professions. And anecdotally, faculty will tell you that the women students are often the best prepared, the highest achieving, and good leaders. So there's a real resource there, but we're not retaining those students particularly well. That retention was mentioned earlier. We lose both men and women students in engineering at about 47%. So when you think about how difficult it is to get to engineering in the first place, to lose students at a rate of 45% is, I think, actually quite heartbreaking. My conclusion in this is that we need more efforts and we need different efforts. I love the Albert Einstein slide. And the truth is, if you always do what you've always done, you're always going to get what you've always gotten. And so it's necessary, I think, now that we change that. This is a slide that talks about sort of our thought processes about gender diversity. In the last 20 years, as I mentioned, there's been a lot of research on the root causes led by a National Science Foundation program called Research on Gender in Science and Engineering. There's also been an important focus, I think, for you all to tap into in the advanced programs that deal with faculty retention and advancement in the STEM fields. I want to draw your attention really to the third bullet. I mean, you know that back in the day we said women can't be engineers, and they can't, and they can't, and they can't. And that forms a foundation for us. But today we're focusing on culture and inclusion. And these three sub-bullets here about emerging research related to collective intelligence, which is now showing that the inclusion of women on teams does a great deal for the ability of those teams to have much higher collective intelligence than any of the individual players. I think that's kind of awesome. Here you all are, all the smartest people in the world gathered in this room with your teams, and there can be some tweaks that you make that make you all even smarter working together, which is real important. I think you've heard several speakers already talk about the connection between innovation and diversity. And the fact is, when you start to get ideas colliding with different perspectives, out of that bounce new ideas. So it's very important to have access to those different perspectives, and it's important to create a culture where people feel comfortable enough in their own situations and their own settings to be able to say, oh, here's my perspective on that. It only takes about 2 or 3 bonks on the head for any person to say, well, I guess they don't know what I have to say. And then you don't get to tap in to those perspectives and generate those new ideas. There are also high industry expectations for cultural competence, and you probably all are aware that that doesn't mean going to the symphony or the art museum. That means being able to work with people from all over the world with a range of different worldviews, social influences, and cultures. No easy task. It requires that you understand your own culture and that of other people as well. So what does it really mean to manage culture? There are many interactions that go on a daily basis in the work that you do in your faculty settings. Sometimes unmanaged cultures result in things like microaggressions, micro-insults, micro-incivilities. All of those things are cumulative, and they're subtle, and they reveal power dynamics that exist. I've put a few examples there, and there's a handout sheet attached on the table that really deals with those microaggressions and incivilities and ways to address them. The corporate sector is investing a lot in effective leadership that manages culture well, and this is an area that I think perhaps is a little scary to lots of people around the room, but this is also an invitation to engage in the practice of managing culture. So there's a little elephant in the room, and I want to point to that. But you're getting this idea. Culture is really complex, it's multifaceted, it's very important. It eats everybody else for breakfast, and demographics is destiny. I'm very confident that all of you will have technical success in whatever you do. I also am confident that that technical success can be enhanced by managing culture and diversity well. This chart is a slide of resources, campus-based resources that you probably have available to you. They're broken down into different levels. I think Rick did a very nice job of talking about engaging with your MEP programs. That can also happen with your Women in Engineering programs that are parallel to the MEP programs. There are advance grants on many campuses, and I would hope that you would be able to leverage all of those. These slides are posted on the WEPAN website, so you can download them easily if you need to refer back to them. My invitation to you today is to become a diversity and inclusion exemplar. I'd like to encourage you to recognize and employ that body of knowledge and scholarship that is embedded in the WEPAN Knowledge Center. I'd like to invite you to figure out how you can become a diversity leader. My other handout might help you get some ideas going about that. I'd like to say that a diversity and inclusion strategic plan, as Brooke referenced, is a key part of making some of the changes that need to be made. I would like to see you, in my dreams, you would fund the plan, you'd staff the plan, you'd work the plan, you'd expect results, and you'd help NSF develop its thoughts about diversity. The last two slides here are resources. Here's a list of some of the webinars that WEPAN offers that you can view at any time. I put stars beside the top 5 there. Here are some references to use as a springboard to get you started. And then again, the NSF goal of preparing and engaging a diverse STEM workforce. I think it would be great if that happened now rather than later. Thanks very much. I appreciate it, and I look forward to the conversation.
Our last speaker before Q&A is Dr. Amir Moran, Dean of the College of Engineering and Computing at Florida International University, and you're on the Council of Deans, I guess, for the Assist Nano ERC.
Good morning. Thank you, Teresa, for your introduction. It gives me great pleasure to be at this panel talking about diversity. Let me tell you a little bit about Florida International University. We are a comprehensive university in Miami with 50,000 students. Our College of Engineering itself has about 5,000 students. We are the largest producer of Hispanic engineers, and we're the 8th largest producer of African American engineers. So we have something to say, obviously, because of the nature of where we are and who we are about diversity. As you can see on the logos at the right bottom of the slide, you see Florida International University, University of Notre Dame, California State University at Los Angeles, and University of Texas El Paso. Back in 2009, when the deans of engineering around the country talked about the grand challenges that the National Academy of Engineering had put out, we talked about, because of the nature of what we do and who we are, we talked about the engineering education itself being a grand challenge for this century. That the foundational grand challenge, the mother of all challenges, is in fact to have the engineering workforce and the engineering innovators who would be able to tackle those challenges. So we got together and with support from the National Science Foundation, the group of 4 deans from the universities that I mentioned earlier, earlier this year had a workshop on broadening participation in engineering workforce. We thought that it is very important to have all hands discussion, and that's why we brought in 50 stakeholders from school districts, community colleges, engineering schools, industry, government, and non-profit organization to talk about this. And we had 4 thematic sessions that we basically covered the entire spectrum from K to Gray, from K to 12 education. How do we engage them early on to be able to produce the engineering-ready students that would enter the colleges of engineering around the country? How do we transform engineering education itself? How do we build better bridges and partnerships between the national research universities and the minority institutions? And how do we promote better ways of industry-university partnerships that would be promoting engineering around the country? And the session that actually Dr. Maldonado spoke at was the 3rd thematic session, which was partnerships between the national research universities and the minority institutions. And we had, in fact, 4 universities representatives representing 2 different ERCs, but from 4 different perspectives. One was the ERC for subsurface sensing and imaging systems, and we had the lead at Northeastern University and a minority institution, University of Puerto Rico, presenting their side. And one of the newer ERCs for revolutionizing metallic biomaterials, where the NCANT is the lead, and University of Pittsburgh. And they did speak about what are the challenges and what are the issues dealing with the ERC that I would mention a little bit later in my talk today. And basically the workshop came to a series of top 10 recommendations and action plans, and the report is at our website, and I will be happy to provide you with a copy of the report. As I said, it is on the website. And we have had very good discussion today with the panelists about making a case for diversity. In fact, it reminds me of a nice pie chart that Dr. McPhail, the president of NACME, National Action Council for Minorities in Engineering, shows. He shows the US Census data and then shows the engineering workforce by different ethnicity. And he makes a very compelling argument that all we want is the 2 to look the same. We heard earlier from Diane a very compelling argument. Why shouldn't we have the expectations of 50-50 in engineering? Why is it that in IT or in many of our more high-tech engineering programs, we have a very, very low representations of women? But I'm not coming to diversity from the perspective of equity. I'm coming to diversity from the perspective of need and necessity. If you look at the back of some of your phones, you would see it says designed in California, assembled in China. And I think that distinction that we have started to make is very compelling. we are beginning to understand that it is not just about where it is manufactured, but it is where the creativity and design and ingenuity comes in. So when the president says that we want to out-innovate, out-educate, and out-build the rest of the world, what is up front is out-innovate. And nobody would be able to argue that this is a national security issue and that we need to promote technological innovation and creativity. And for that reason, when you look at the engineering workforce, the alarming trend is this, that on the demand side, you do have a growing demand not only for technical fields, but also even in non-technical fields for engineers and scientists. And then you have the retiring of baby boomers. But on the supply side, not only you see a stagnant growth of the engineering graduates, a stagnant supply of engineering graduates, but also, as was mentioned earlier, if you look at the data for the next 20 years, the underrepresented minorities would be counting for 75% of newborns. So it is not so much an issue of equity or affirmative action, but it is in reality the only viable action that if we want to maintain the leadership in creativity, ingenuity, and technological advances, we need to have a diverse engineering workforce and a diverse group of engineers that would be able to innovate. So, which brings us to this, that those universities, such as ours, that are catering to the demographics that the rest of the country is going to see, we feel that we are at the front line of this challenge of engineering education. And that's why we, together with the rest of the universities, we would need assistance to be able to address these issues. The group, after the workshop, came together, and just like the goals that was set earlier by WEPAN or NACME, we came up with a bold goal that we see diversity tied to the future of the profession of engineering, and we felt that we need to increase the percentage of minorities and underrepresented minorities in engineering from the current 12.4% that ASEE shows to 20% by 2025. And I would skip this one to say that the group that we have developed is coming up with a panel, with a plan of action. This is a 5-point plan, and no, I'm not running for president. But this covers the various aspects. There's no single bullet that would be able to solve this issue. And obviously, one side of it, which we cannot forget, is the financial aid. One side of it is how early we would be able to tackle the problem and integrate engineering and talking about the built environment, not just the natural environment, in the K-12. How do we transform engineering education to be more appealing and more relevant to the needs of our engineering students? How do we develop a partner, and this is what relates to this audience, how do we build better bridges between national research universities and minority institutions? And obviously ERC is one great example of it. And also between the industry and the universities in a model that we would like to think after medical schools in terms of the internships, joint faculty appointments, and others. And obviously, as was said earlier, we cannot tackle the problem without having the right role models. And that's why it's so crucial to see that the faculty development and recruitment with diversity is at the top of the list. And that's why we need to have, as Rick said, deans even from all over the world that care about the issue of diversity. So how does it all relate to the ERCs? First of all, we should not think about this as a bifurcated problem. It's not about engineering workforce on the one hand and engineering innovation on the other hand. Unless we tackle this problem together And as one single problem, we would not be able to address it. It's not that there are some universities that are going to go through just producing bachelors without any clue as to what research is all about, and there are going to be the ones that would get some of these or few of these graduates and would train them to be innovators. It has to be integrated in the curricula throughout. And that's why ERC is so important, because in fact ERC is one of the few that promotes integration of research and education. We need to embrace diversity as an engine of innovation. It's diversity of people, diversity of ideas that would be generated from that. The ERCs, my humble opinion, is that should take the driver's seat for setting the diversity agenda for NSF. And even though the numbers may show that you are doing much, much better than the national averages, but this is perhaps one of the examples that when good is not good enough, and that you need to set bold targets for what is the diversity in different thrust areas, what is the diversity in each institution, and what is the diversity in terms of the overall representations of minorities in the various ERCs. I would like for those universities that have partners with minority institutions to not look at your minority partner as simply a minority partner, but rather look at it as your partner that would be able to, even if you think about developing a mentor-protege program, still would be able to contribute both to the education side and to the research side of the ERC. It is very important that in each ERC there would be culture of exchange of students, exchange of faculty, because that's the only way that you would be able to instill the culture of research and innovation throughout the ERC, so that it would be a seamless transition if you go from this institution to that institution, which belongs to the same ERC, and you would be able to get the same feeling and the same sense of urgency for innovation. The last 2 points, I think that these are ideas that we have in terms of how we would be able to improve or leverage the ERCs to improve the diversity, especially at minority-serving institutions. One is, how do we leverage ERCs to get support from the industry for the minority-serving institutions? And the second is, how do we augment the ERCs at minority-serving institutions to build, through maybe MRIs, the major research instrumentations and acquisitions, to be able to build the infrastructure at the minority-serving institutions, so that you would be able to have more and more engagement of minority-serving institutions in the ERCs. So with that, I conclude, and I hope that as America is known as a melting pot of different ideas and different and diverse groups, it would continue to be as such, and it would be for ERCs to take the lead for setting bold agenda for diversity. Thank you.
Okay, we'd like to open the floor for questions, please, for the panelists. You probably, if you Google the name of the report, I've done that before and it popped up. Okay. Let's see. I just saw a hand fly up over here. The contrast with the wall is weird in this lighting. Yes.
Well, I'd like to thank all the panelists, but I'm a little disappointed you really didn't mention people with disabilities or veterans in your diversity efforts. And 1 in 7 Americans are people with disabilities, and they face a lot of the challenges that you described plus additional challenges such as physical inaccessibility of many of our labs in high schools as well as in colleges.
You're absolutely right.
Question. And also, I had the benefit of sitting in yours and Mary's presentation yesterday, which was amazing, in the education breakout session, and I wish the entire group could have heard that. But we will have that as part of a main dialogue here. Thank you for bringing that up. There was one right here. You still have a question?
I worked on this diversity issues in my campus for many years. So the comment I'm making is it's not casual. It's been thought out over many years. A lot of the efforts that are discussed today and that many places throughout the nation is, for lack of a better term, I would call it as top-down approach, which is good to get it from the 2% to 20%. But I think it's again, for lack of a better term, I would call it as the Soviet-style approach. However, to go from 20% to 50% is a completely different approach that we need, because many of these things, unless they are inherently supporting, once the forcing function disappears, they'll just go back to their natural state. So I don't know exactly what it is, but after having thought about this for 20 years, I'm convinced that's where the difference in this theory of if you have to do this, if you keep doing the same thing, you will get the same results. I think we have already hit asymptotes I am a scientist and I speak scientific terms. But we've already hit asymptotes on these numbers, and I think it needs a completely different approach. And I don't know what it is, but I know I will recognize it when I see that. Thank you.
Way back there and then here.
Hello. I feel like this assessment is unfair, just due to the fact that we live in a society today. We are going into 2013. Women, I will speak about women and African Americans. I attended, as an undergraduate, the most diverse university in the nation, Rutgers, Newark. And I saw that women and African Americans are not interested in engineering. So it's not the problem with the, sorry, I'm very nervous. The problem isn't with the centers. I right now work with CSOPs, and the staff itself is extremely diversity, and we're looking for every way to bring in diversity, because we are very opening. And it's not just the staff, it's not just that we want diversity, but the staff itself is diverse. And that it's just, we do everything that we can, there's so much that we can do, but at the same time, there has to be intrinsic motivation from the students itself. When you were talking about the engineering women in high school, a lot of high school students attend engineering high school so that when they go to apply to colleges, they can look good when they go to apply to colleges. Oh, I attended, this very difficult school, and now I want to do something else. But me as a woman, I was never interested in engineering. Of course, I'm just speaking for myself. But when you look at overall the women population, a lot of women going into education or management, there's just so many different fields. But I feel like it's unfair to say that it's because of the centers that we don't welcome in diversity. That's the reason that women are not coming in, or African Americans are not coming in. I can't speak about disabilities and veterans because I truly don't know too much about that. But I went to school with so many different cultures, so many. I can say when you sat in the room, it was just basically rainbows, just because of how diverse and how beautiful it was to be in such a beautiful, diverse community. But even with you have so many majors, students want to go into something else. And I think the thing is, when you talked about the percentage going from 2% to 20% with women engineering, it's because, before, yes, it was, this is true, I would say about 20 years ago, that centers need to be opening to women and African American. But today, look at us, look at this society. It's beautiful in a way that we're very welcoming in every shape and form. Now, when it comes to I feel that 20% will increase over the years, because now the 20%, the parents who are engineers, have kids, and these kids will look up to their parents. Ooh, I want to become an engineer. The 2% that was first there, there was only 2%, okay? So kids saw their aunt, their mother, their friend, this, and that. They're engineers, so they look up to that. They inspire to that. So I think that as a center, we are very limited to what we can do, because this is something that a child sees. A child sees that, you know, this community has now 20% women, and in the future, there will be absolutely more, because first of all, the population is growing a lot. And then also, another factor is that there are a lot of role models. Okay, thank you. That's it.
I'm not sure how to respond to that right now, but I acknowledge everything you said, and you make me think about if we disaggregate the data according to engineering disciplines. I think some of the increases have to do with the growth in biomedical engineering and environmental engineering, and if you look at electrical and some of these other traditional disciplines, you might still see some rather disappointing statistics. But I'll go to the next questioner. But thank you for your comments.
Actually, my next comment, I hope, follows up pretty nicely with your statements that I think there is a problem with interest and motivation, particularly amongst women. I do some research in that area myself. And one of the problems that I see is actually has to do with industry. And I think this is one place that the centers could have an opportunity for making change in our interactions with industry and really communicating with industry ways of making essentially more family-friendly environments and environments that are more open to women. As I work with women engineers, the horror stories that I hear about interviewing and being told that they should dress in a male style, that they need to not talk about family plans, that they need to be as masculine as possible. Being told this as they're preparing for interviews and then being told this during the interview by people who are trying to mentor them. So I think and I see this feeling from women students. So I don't think it's actually fair if we were to increase the number of women in engineering and prepare them for the workforce, to prepare them for a workforce that may be hostile. So I think that's something that as we have industry partners, as we can work with those industry partners, we might actually be able to create some change in that direction.
Thank you. There's someone over here, and then we'll go back there.
Yeah, Fernando Mucio, director of CSOPS. I want to make a comment first from the perspective of a center director, and then one personal comment. So the one, from the perspective of a director is that I completely agree that the ERCs should be the labs where we experiment how to do better, mainly because we have the scale and the credibility institutionally. So it might be a good idea at some point to sit down and think about what some of the new programs could be and where we could find the money for them. We have plenty of ideas that we are very eager to share, okay? Well, that said, I now want to share a couple of thoughts as a Latino who is also a full professor at a major university. And my thoughts go to your numerical targets as well as your interpretation of that drop-off that you talked about, which you are calling attrition, which may or may not be. When I joined Rutgers 20 years ago, my department had 1 woman faculty. Today it has 6. 2 of them are full professors, 2 of them are associate, and 2 of them are assistant, because it's going to take another 10 years to get to 6 full professors. So I think you're just seeing a moving train, yeah? And I think that the train is shooting at an asymptote of about 20%. Now, if you want to increase that 20%, you need to get more than 20% undergrads too, okay? However, I do want to challenge, and I want us to invite you to really justify and think about what would be the right number, or why even there is a right number, and why the right number is 50-50 and not 60-40 or 30-70 or whatever. Because I remember, not too long ago, we had numerical targets that then were declared illegal in, for example, the famous cases with Michigan and California. And if we were to say to you, we had the target of 30%, we would be breaking the law, actually, and we would be getting in trouble. Yeah? So I think numbers can be a dangerous thing, among other reasons, because none of us knows what is the quote-unquote right number. I think what we need instead is a clear system that attracts the best people, regardless of gender, regardless of color, regardless of disability status, and more important than attract them is it nurtures them. We put the resources in place to overcome what is the main reason why we lose too many minority undergrads, which is, I'll speak bluntly, yeah? As a Hispanic, I'll tell you this. They come from lousy high schools. The real problem here is high school education in many of the neighborhoods where the majority populations are minority kids are weak. What experience do I have to say this? My son was a high school teacher for 4 years in Harlem. And I saw what he dealt with. And I saw, among other things, these kids sometimes go home and there is no food. These kids sometimes go home and they get sexually abused. Right? So they might be very bright. We get them in college, but unless we have remedial education programs that help them overcome the deficiencies in STEM disciplines, unless we bring them maybe at the beginning of the summer rather than in September and help them come up to speed, they will fail, or worse, they will be passed along to the next course to fail later, which is horrible. So if we really want to get somewhere in this issue, we had to take an honest view at what is causing those plateaus, rather than try to articulate a numerical goal, because you know what? The system will respond to your numerical goal. We will take in more kids, we will be more flexible at admission, and we will then make them fail in greater numbers. Or worse than that, we will pass them along, and we will go back to the days where some people were saying, oh, this person got there because is a woman, is a Latino, is black, is, whatever. I, as a Hispanic senior academic, don't want to ever hear that again.
I just would like to say thank you for those comments and the comments back here earlier. I think what you're doing a really great job of is identifying how complex this challenge is. It is not simple. It is not easy. It has root causes in families. It has root causes in our general culture. This is a hard problem. And I don't want you to think that the goal of 50-50, that's a glimmery little thing in the future. May not be able to get there. But I think the idea that the talent in this, in our nation, resides in all of the different underrepresented groups is an important thing to remember, as well as the way these demographic charts are going. So I think you've done a great job of surfacing a lot of issues that I hope everybody can think about going forward. Thank you. Anybody else want to add anything?
Hi, thank you very much for your comments, and certainly the comments that have been made from the floor have been very thought-provoking. I think I'd just like to make the point that what we're really being asked to do here today is take ownership for what we can do. Yes, there are minority kids that come from impoverished backgrounds, but there are white kids that come from impoverished backgrounds. Yes, there's differential levels of interest in science and engineering, but that holds true for every field. What we're really trying to accomplish here today is an understanding and awareness of what the workforce is that's coming up the pipeline and what the demands are from industry and from government. And so the question really is, what can each of us do? And I know it's very hard as a scientist or as an engineer to step outside the technical aspect, and I don't want to stereotype, but often the knowledge that needs to be brought into the equation is from the social sciences. So just as we learned yesterday, there has to be a knowledge base I think one thing that we can do is ask ourselves, what can I learn about teaching optimally in a diverse environment? And so that's what we need to seek, is those resources that can be brought to bear. They don't necessarily cost a lot, so it's not simply a funding question. But another portion of it is the attitude, which was also on that triangle from yesterday. So everybody just think hard, think creatively, and have the attitude.